Two objections still remain to be examined, the only ones really deserving of the name, because they are the only ones founded on a rational basis. Both admit the reality of the material and moral phenomena of Spiritism, but deny the intervention of spirits in their production. According to the first of these objections, all the manifestations attributed to spirits are merely effects of magnetism, and mediums are in a state that might be called walking somnambulism, a phenomena which may have been observed by anyone who has studied animal magnetism. In this state, the intellectual faculties acquire an abnormal development. The circle of our intuitive perceptions is extended beyond its ordinary limits. The medium finds in himself, and with the aid of his lucidity, all that he says and all the notions transmitted to him by him, even in regard to subjects with which he is least familiar in his usual state. It is not by us who have witnessed its prodigies and studied all its phases during 35 years that the action of somnambulism could be contested, and we admit that many spirit manifestations may be thus explained. But we assert that sustained and attentive observation shows us a host of facts in which any intervention of the medium, otherwise than as a passive instrument, is absolutely impossible. To those who attribute the phenomena in question to magnetism, we would say, as to all others, see and observe, for you have certainly not seen everything. And we would also ask them to consider the two following points suggested by their own view of the subject. In the first place, we would ask them, what is the origin of the hypothesis of spirit action? Is it an explanation invented by a few individuals to account for these phenomena? Not at all. By whom, then, has it been broached? By the very mediums whose lucidity you extol. But if their lucidity be such as you declare it to be, why should they attribute to spirits what they have derived from themselves? How can they have given information so precise, logical, sublime, in regard to the nature of those extra-human intelligences? Either mediums are lucid or they are not. If they are, and if we trust to their veracity, we cannot, without inconsistency, suppose them to be in error on this point. In the second place, if all the phenomena had their source in the medium himself, they would always be identical in the case of each individual, and we should never find the same medium making use of different styles of expression or giving utterance to contradictory statements. The want of unity so often observed in the manifestations obtained by the same medium is a proof of the diversity of the sources from which they proceed. And as the case of this diversity is not to be found in the medium himself, it must be sought for elsewhere. According to the other objection, the medium is really the source of the manifestations, but instead of deriving them from himself, it is asserted by the partisans of the somnambulic theory, he derives them from the persons among whom he finds himself. The medium is a sort of mirror reflecting all the thoughts, ideas, and knowledge of those about him, from which it follows that he says nothing which is not known to at least some of them. It cannot be denied, for it is one of the fundamental principles of Spiritist doctrine, that those who are present exercise an influence upon the manifestation. But this influence is very different from what it is assumed to be by the hypothesis we are considering, and so far from the medium being the mere echo of the thoughts of those around him, there are thousands of facts that prove directly the contrary. This objection is therefore based on a serious mistake and one that shows the danger of hasty judgments, those who bring it forward being unable to deny the reality of phenomena, which the science of the day is incompetent to explain, and being unwilling to admit the presence of spirits, explain them in their own way. Their theory would be specious if it explained all the facts of the case, But this it cannot do. In vain it is proved by the evidence of facts that the communications of the medium are often entirely foreign to the thoughts, knowledge, and even the opinions of those who are present, and that they are frequently spontaneous and contradict all received ideas. The opponents referred to are not discouraged by so slight a difficulty. The radiation of thought, say they, extends far beyond the circle immediately around them. The medium is a reflection of the human race in general, so that if he does not derive his inspiration from those about him, he derives them from those who are further off in the town or country he inhabits, from the people of the rest of the globe, and even from those of other spheres. We do not think that this theory furnishes a more simple and probable explanation than that given by Spiritism, for it assumes the action of a cause very much more marvelous. The idea that universal space is peopled by beings who are in perpetual contact with us and who communicate to us their ideas is certainly not more repugnant to reason than the hypothesis of a universal radiation coming from every point in the universe and converging in the brain of a single individual to the exclusion of all the others. We repeat, and this is a point of such importance that we cannot insist too strongly upon it, that the somnambulist theory, and that which may be called the theory of reflection, have been devised by the imagination of men, while, on the contrary, the theory of spirit agency is not a conception of the human mind, for it was dictated by the manifesting intelligences themselves, at a time when no one thought of spirits, and when the opinion of the generality of men was opposed to such a supposition. We have therefore to inquire first from what quarter the mediums can have derived a hypothesis which had no existence in the thought of anyone on earth. And secondly, by what strange coincidence can it have happened that tens of thousands of mediums, scattered over the entire globe and utterly unknown to one another, all agree in asserting the same thing? If the first medium who appeared in France was influenced by opinions already received in America, by what strange guidance was he made to go in search of ideas across 2,000 leagues of sea and among a people whose habits and language were foreign to his own, instead of taking them in his own immediate vicinity? But there is yet another circumstance to which sufficient attention has not been given. The earliest manifestations in Europe as in America were not made either by writing or by speech, but by raps indicating the letters of the alphabet and forming words and sentences. It is by this means that the manifesting intelligence declared themselves to be spirits, and therefore, even though we should admit an intervention of the medium's mind in the production of verbal or written communications, we could not do so in regard to raps, whose meaning could not have been known beforehand. We might adduce any number of facts proving the existence of a personal individuality and an absolutely independent will on the part of the manifesting intelligence, and we therefore invite our opponents to a more attentive observation of the phenomena in question, assuring them that if they study these without prejudice and refrain from drawing a conclusion until they have made themselves thoroughly acquainted with the subject, they will find that their theories are unable to account for all of them. We will only propose to such antagonists the two following queries. Number 1. Why does it so often happen that the manifesting intelligence refuses to answer certain questions in regard to matters that are perfectly known to the questioner, as, for instance, his name or age, what he has in his hand, what he did yesterday, what he intends to do on the morrow? If the medium be only a mirror reflecting the thought of those about him, Nothing should be easier for him than to answer such questions. If our adversaries retort by inquiring, why is it that spirits, who ought to know everything, are unable to answer questions so simple, and conclude from this presumed inability that the phenomena cannot be caused by spirits, we would ask them whether, if an ignorant or foolish person should inquire of some learned body the reason of it being light at noonday, any answer would be returned to his question, and whether it would be reasonable to conclude from the derision or the silence with which such a question might be received that its members were merely a set of asses. It is precisely because they are at a higher point than ourselves that spirits decline to answer idle and foolish questions, keeping silent when such are asked, or advising us to employ ourselves with more serious subjects. We have also to ask them why it is that spirits come and depart at their own pleasure, and why, when once they have taken their departure, neither prayers nor entreaties can bring them back. If the medium were acted upon solely by the mental impulsion of those around him, it is evident that the union of their wills in such a case ought to stimulate his clairvoyance. If, therefore, he did not yield to the wishes of those assembled, strengthened by his own desire, it is because he obeys an influence which is distinct from himself and from those about him, and which thus asserts its own independence and individuality. Incredulity got it right, in regard to spirit communication, when not the result of systematic opposition from selfish motives, has almost always its source in an imperfect acquaintance with the facts of the case. Which, however, does not prevent a good many persons from attempting to settle the question as though they were perfectly familiar with it. It is possible to be very clever, very learned, and yet to lack clearness of judgment, and a belief in one's own infallibility is the surest sign of the existence of his defect. Many persons, too, regard spirit manifestations as being only a matter of curiosity. Let us hope that the reading of this book will show them that the wonderful phenomena in question are something else than a pastime. Spiritism consists of two parts. One of these, the experimental, deals with the subject of the manifestations in general. The other, the philosophic, deals with a class of manifestations denoting intelligence. Whoever has only observed the former is in the position of one whose knowledge of physics, limited to experiments of an amusing nature, does not extend to the fundamental principles of that science. Spiritist philosophy consists of teachings imparted by spirits, and the knowledge thus conveyed is of a character far too serious to be mastered without serious and persevering attention. If the present book had no other result than to show the serious nature of the subject, and to induce inquirers to approach it in this spirit, it would be sufficiently important, and we should rejoice to have been chosen for the accomplishment of a work in regard to which we take no credit to ourselves, the principles it contains not being of our own creating, and whatever honor it may obtain being entirely due to the spirits by whom it has been dictated. We hope that it will achieve yet another result, that of serving as a guide to those who are desirous of enlightenment, by showing them the grand and sublime end of individual and social progress, to which the teachings of Spiritism directly tend, and by pointing out to them the road by which alone that end can be reached. Let us wind up these introductory remarks with one concluding observation. Astronomers, in sounding the depths of the sky, discovered seemingly vacant spaces not in accordance with the general laws that govern the distribution of the heavenly bodies, and they therefore conjectured that those spaces were occupied by globes that had escaped their observation. On the other hand, they observed certain effects, the cause of which was unknown to them, and they said to themselves, in such a region of space there must be a world, for otherwise there would be a void that ought not to exist. And the effects we have observed imply the presence of that seeming void of such a world as their cause. Reasoning then from these effects to their cause, they calculated the elements of the globe, whose presence they had inferred, and facts subsequently justified their inference. Let us apply the same mode of reasoning to another order of ideas. If we observe the series of beings, we find that they form a continuous chain from brute matter to man. But between man and God, who is the Alpha and Omega of all things, what an immense hiatus! It is reasonable to suppose that the links of the chain stop short with man, that he can vault without transition over the distance which separates him from the infinite. Reason shows us that between man and God there must be other links, just as it shows the astronomer that between the worlds then known to them there must be other worlds as yet unknown to them. What system of philosophy has filled this hiatus? Spiritism shows that it is filled with the beings of all the ranks of the invisible world, and that these beings are no other than the spirits of men who have reached the successive degrees that lead up to perfection, and all things are thus seen to be linked together from one end of the chain to the other. Let those who deny the existence of spirits tell us what are the occupants of the immensity of space which spirits declare to be occupied by them. And let those who scoff at the ideal of spirit teachings give us a nobler ideal than is given by those teachings of the handiwork of God, a more convincing demonstration of his goodness and his power.